There's a game remake that's quietly becoming one of the most interesting RPG stories of the year, even though most Western players have never even heard of the original. It's called Sword and Fairy 4, and in China, this series is basically gaming mythology. Think of what Final Fantasy means to Japan, and you're roughly in the right ballpark. It's a long-running epic of magic, fate, and heartbreak that's been shaping Chinese RPG culture since the mid-90s. Now, it's being rebuilt in Unreal Engine 5 with cinematic turn-based combat, massive visual upgrades, and, for the first time, full global localization. And what's wild is how it's connecting with Western RPG fans who mostly love games like Final Fantasy, Persona 5, or, of course, Clair Obscur, Expedition 33, because on the surface it looks familiar, but under the hood, this game is playing by its own rulebook. So let's talk about what makes this remake stand out, why it's being compared to some of the biggest names in the genre, and why it might be one of the most culturally important RPGs heading into 2026. Alright, quick recap. So Sword and Fairy started way back in 1995. Old school, turn-based PC RPG stuff. It mixed, and apologies if I get the pronunciation of this stuff wrong, wuxia fantasy, and that is basically the martial arts, heroism you see in stuff like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and stuff like that, with Xianxia, and that's basically kind of immortal, spiritual mythology filled with celestial beings and moral tests. Now, the entry getting remade is Sword and Fairy 4, which came out in 2007, and among fans, it's an emotional favourite. The story that defines what the series is. You play as Yun, a mountain kid who's lived his whole life in isolation. One day he runs into a stranger robbing his parents' tomb, and that chance meeting throws him into this sweeping journey of discovery, magic, and destiny. Classic RPG stuff, but seen through a totally different cultural lens. The catch? That 2007 version was never localized for us Westerners. Unless you spoke Mandarin, this masterpiece might as well have not existed. That's why this remake matters. It isn't just updating graphics, it's basically introducing a 20-year-old legend to the rest of the world for the first time. So, what's new here? The remake's being handled by Cube Game and Up Software, built in UE5, and visually it is looking gorgeous. Seriously, take one look at the trailer and you'll see what I mean. Lush lighting, flowing particle effects, detail everywhere, but the bigger talking point is the combat. It's still turn-based, but now it's got this timing-based parry feature, a reactive layer that makes fights feel way more dynamic. If you've played Clair Obscur, you'll immediately see the connection. The camera swings in cinematic motion, the animation cues are synced to your counter timing, it just feels alive. Now, obviously, parrying isn't new. Paper Mario did it back in the day. What's new is how it's presented. Instead of static turns and menus, you've got this vibrant rhythm, something that feels more like a conversation than a transaction. It's familiar to modern players while still grounded in a slower, more deliberate energy. So yeah, everyone's throwing around comparisons. We've already mentioned Final Fantasy, Persona, Clair Obscur, etc. And honestly, those aren't bad touch points. Final Fantasy fits because Sword and Fairy shares that same DNA of mythic drama, characters wrestling with fate, love, and sacrifice. Persona because it's visual language, the stylized UI, the cinematic transitions. They've shaped how people expect turn-based games to look now in the sort of modern era. And Clair Obscur, that's just a fair comparison in terms of tone and combat choreography. Both games treat turn-based fighting like an art performance, but where Clair Obscur is theatrical and melancholic, all paint and tragedy, Sword and Fairy 4 looks to feel calmer, more spiritual. It's less avenge the world and more understand yourself before you change it. And that difference matters, mechanically and thematically. This game doesn't just want you to react, it wants you to listen. Now, what's really interesting about all of this is timing. We just came off a year where Clair Obscur pretty much redefined what cinematic turn-based gameplay could be. Suddenly, everyone's talking about the future of turn-based combat. And then, as if from nowhere, in comes Sword and Fairy 4 Remake, which, instead of ditching tradition, embraces it, then reinterprets it with modern precision. It's the opposite of what Final Fantasy has been doing lately with its shift toward full-action combat. And this game is coming in and saying, no, turn-based combat still has life, you just have to make it fluid and beautiful. It's kind of poetic that it's a Chinese studio making that statement, because for years Chinese developers were kind of seen as fast followers, taking ideas from Japan or from the West, but this wave of new titles like Black Myth Wukong, Tides of Annihilation, and now Sword and Fairy 4 shows a shift. The design language is global now, but the heart is distinctly Chinese. Harmony, fate, duality. Now honestly, the story in this game is what could make or break this remake's reception in the West. Sword and Fairy 4 isn't about defeating ultimate evil, it's about the intersection of destiny and empathy. Yun's journey in the game is personal, about rediscovering connection after isolation, something we've all probably felt in some way. The characters, the music, the spiritual motifs, they all build this kind of melancholic beauty that's very unlike anything you'd get in, say, Persona 5 Royale or Final Fantasy 16. It's less about saving the world and more about reconciling with it. And this time, with a full English translation confirmed, Western players can finally get it, not just watch the subtitles on a YouTube fan translation. That alone could be huge for the franchise's future. Now, of course, not everyone's convinced. Some players online worry that the game looks too much like Clair Obscur and that it could kind of lose its own identity trying to appeal to Western tastes. And yeah, that's a fair concern. But honestly, trends evolve like ecosystems. Nobody owns reactive turn-based combat, just like nobody owns open world exploration. It's all about what each team does with those tools. And Sword and Fairy 4 Remake seems to be using them to create flow, not flash. If Clair Obscur is heart-pounding, this feels heartwarming. Both can coexist. They just express different forms of emotion through similar systems. So, here's the big takeaway. If you're into RPGs that put storytelling, atmosphere, and mechanics on equal footing, Sword and Fairy 4 Remake definitely deserves your attention. It's a window into an entire lineage of RPG design that's been quietly thriving outside the Western spotlight for decades. And with how global the genre has become, Japan borrowing from the West and the West borrowing from Japan, it feels like the perfect time for China to add its own voice to the mix. So yeah, in a year that's already stacked with heavy hitters, this might end up being one of the most important RPGs you didn't have on your radar. Not because it's reinventing everything, but because it's reminding us that reinvention often starts with remembering why we loved these games in the first place. And with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this one, guys. Don't forget to like, subscribe, smash that notification bell, and text your grandma and tell her what's going down. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.